I am Rabbi Abby Sharofsky, Director of Intergroup Relations and Rabbi in Residence for the JCRC of Greater Washington. And thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Marriage Equality on the Virginia Ballot. In 2005, 10 years before the Supreme Court ruled that the fundamental right to marry is guaranteed to same-sex couples nationwide, JCRC of Greater Washington adopted a resolution in support of rights for LGBTQ plus people, although it was 2005 and the resolution was titled Gay Rights Policy Resolution. It stated, the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington affirms its opposition to discrimination against persons based on sexual orientation. The Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington expresses its support for government action that provides civil status to committed same-sex couples and their families equal to the civil status provided to the committed relationships of men and women and their families, with all associated legal rights and obligations, both federal and state. The Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington opposes efforts at the federal and state level, whether through legislation or constitutional amendment, that would limit or deny legal benefits to same-sex couples and their families. The following year, Virginians voted against marriage equality, authorizing language for the Commonwealth's Constitution that defined marriage as a union between one man and one woman. While the landmark Oberfeld v. Hodge Supreme Court ruling legalized same-sex marriage nationwide and invalidated state bans, the actual text of the ban remains in the Virginia Constitution. Today, we are upholding the values and commitments JCRC made over 20 years ago, opposing discrimination of LGBTQ plus individuals and their families. Our commitment to oppose state efforts to limit marriage equality has not wavered, and we are proud to be part of this effort to remove the ban from the Virginia Constitution. Before I turn to Vicki to introduce our panelists, I'd like to remind participants that this webinar is being recorded and will be available for later viewing. The chat has been turned off, and if you'd like to submit a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Accessibility features, including transcription, are available on this webinar by clicking the three dots at the bottom of your screen. Thank you very much. Vicki.
Thank you, Abby, and thanks everybody for being here. It's my honor to introduce our panelists. I'm going to start with former Virginia Senator Adam Eban, and I will share that he has instructed me that I should now call him Adam. So I don't want anyone to think I'm being disrespectful. Thank you for all of your service to Virginia. Adam Eban has been served in the Senate from 2012 until earlier this year, when he joined the Spanberger administration as senior advisor to the Virginia Cannabis Control Authority. Prior to his election to the Senate, he served for 8 years in the House of Delegates. While in the General Assembly, Senior Advisor Eban was a leader on advancing public safety and worked tirelessly to protect civil rights, passing a comprehensive ban on discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodations on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. Adam has been a champion of coalition building and pragmatic solutions throughout his career. He also founded the Virginia Partisan Gay and Lesbian Democratic Club. Thank you, former Senator Eban, Adam, for being here. I'll get used to it, I promise. Next, I'm going to turn to our second panelist, introduce our second panelist. We originally had advertised that Narissa Rahman would be joining us. She unfortunately ultimately was unable to be here, but we are joined by, oh my goodness, I just lost there we go. Reed Williams. Reed Williams serves as Director of Communications at Equality Virginia and leads campaign communications at Virginians for Marriage Equality. A proud transgender Virginian from Virginia Beach, Reed advocates for policies that support LGBTQ plus communities and currently serves on the Virginia LGBTQ plus Advisory Board. She has spoken nationally on LGBTQ plus equality and healthcare access, including a TED Woman 2023 talk on affirming spaces for LGBTQ plus youth. Reed holds a BA with high distinction in political and social thought and English literature from the University of Virginia. Reed, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And finally, last but not least, John Cohen is the Director of Community Mobilization at Keshet, a national community builder with a commitment to LGBTQ plus rights. His work organizing diverse communities through a Jewish lens is inspired and informed by his gay, Mexican, and Jewish experiences and the wisdom he gleans from each aspect of his identity. As Keshet's Director of Community Mobilization, John has mobilized Jewish institutions in all 50 states to fight for LGBTQ plus rights. Since graduating from Florida State University, John has applied his passions for the Jewish community and service to a variety of fellowships and positions in Jewish advocacy through organizations such as Repair the World, the Greater Miami Jewish Federation, Uri L'Tzedek Torah in Action, Bend the Ark, Joyous Justice Koach Fellowship, Jutina y Copuentes, Leadership and Resiliency, and the Jews of Color Initiative. Thank you, John, for being here. I'm now going to just ask each of you to introduce yourself and your role in this exciting initiative, ballot initiative. I'm going to go ahead and start with Adam. I know you were part of this ballot initiative right from the get-go and introducing it into the General Assembly. Can you talk about that process, why it matters here in Virginia?
Sure. Well, as was explained in the prelude, the Constitution in Virginia, uh, in words, bans marriage equality, and we we had that overturned through the courts. And it's important to me that the words of our Constitution reflect the law of the land. And in terms of my role, I was involved in 2006 as the honorary chair of the campaign against the effort to write discrimination into our Constitution, into our Virginia Bill of Rights. And since then, as a former legislator, I spent a lot of time trying to repeal it through the legislative route. And it has passed through the General Assembly several times. And unfortunately, at one point it passed, and then it has to pass in a subsequent year after an election. And because of a change in the partisan makeup of the General Assembly, it was not considered in the House of Delegates that second year or failed. But we were lucky to pass it 2 years in a row now to reflect the will of the people of Virginia and allowing them a vote in reconsidering whether we want Virginia to be an outlier or let Virginia follow the law of the land and, in fact, have an affirmative right to marry. Our amendment is important because it not only removes the bad language, but it also writes in that no one would be denied a marriage license or a marriage because of their gender, sex, or their race, because Virginia also had a history of prohibiting interracial marriage in the past, and we thought it was important that we recognize that as well.
Thank you. And for those who don't know, since you referenced the racial context, Loving versus Virginia, which made bans on interracial marriages illegal around the country, originated in Virginia. So I guess we have a history of confronting these marriage issues. Reed Williams, if you can talk to us, I know that at Equality Virginia, you are now very involved in pushing this measure across the finish line. If you can talk about Equality Virginia's work and your work as well, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So I work as the Director of Communications at Equality Virginia. So I am doing a lot of work helping to lead communications at Virginians for Marriage Equality, which is the campaign to remove Virginia's same-sex marriage ban from our state constitution this November. And I really think that marriage equality has been a central part of Equality Virginia's work, even since 2006, when Virginia voters decided to write a ban on same-sex marriage into our Constitution the first time around. And so, we're at the point where marriage equality has been the law of the land nationally for over a decade, but that language is still sitting in our Constitution. And while it's dormant, it's not gone. And I think that's a very important distinction to be making in this conversation. So this November, voters actually have the opportunity to remove it for good, which would make Virginia the first state in the South actually to do so. And I would argue that, that urgency isn't really about today, it's about what stays possible for people in the future, for generations to come. Because a right that only exists when no court has currently overturned it isn't really the same thing as a right that's actually written into law, into the highest governing document in Virginia. And so this amendment closes that gap, and ensures that all Virginians are protected in their right to marry the person they love, no matter who's in power in any given year. And, through Equality Virginia, this has been one of the central pieces of our work for decades, but especially this year, where we are working with Virginians for Marriage Equality to run a really layered field and communications program. So that involves things like canvassing and phone banking, text banking, and even relational organizing through a new tool that we're using called Empower, which can help supporters reach people in their own networks. But we've also been, recruiting LGBTQ plus couples and families from across Virginia to try and share their stories publicly, because oftentimes, the most persuasive voice in these fights and on this issue is rarely going to be a paid campaign ad. It's going to be somebody you already know, somebody you love and already trust. And I personally spent, the last several weeks on calls with like couples and elders across Virginia, just hearing what their lives looked like before marriage equality. And I think it's really hammered home for me just how much is still at stake for them now. And so, where things stand, right? The primary got pushed to August this year, which gives us a very short window to actually reach voters before early voting starts this September. And so the good news is that, we're polling very strong. This is a winning issue in Virginia. But I think the real challenge that we're going to be facing going forward is turning people out and making sure our supporters actually know what's on the ballot, how it's phrased, since a lot of people kind of assume that the fight for marriage equality is already over. And we have, opponents already trying to start muddy the message, trying to claim that this amendment is really about something else or, a distraction from other issues. So I think staying disciplined, is going to be what's really central in our work and ensuring that this vote is very clearly about marriage and equal treatment under the law between now and November. So I'm excited to be a part of this conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. John, if you can give us a little bit of the Jewish perspective on this issue and maybe even a little bit of sort of what you're seeing nationally and what lessons we can learn here in Virginia.
Absolutely. Yeah, so much of what has already been said is so powerful, and thank you all so much for your organizing on this issue. I live in Florida, and we also have a marriage ban on record in our legislature, and so I know with that, especially after Roe v. Wade, like to know that it can change so quickly is so unsettling. Um, I'm here representing Keshet, which is the leading Jewish and LGBTQ national nonprofit in the United States. We go into Jewish organizations and institutions and teach them how to be inclusive to LGBTQ people and create senses of belonging. We create spaces for queer Jewish youth ages 11 to 24 to have empowered spaces in person and virtually. And the work that I'm here doing is our advocacy work, our community mobilization work, where we have been existing as a bridge between secular LGBTQ advocacy organizations and Jewish organizations and Jewish communities that want to take action through a faith lens and as Jewish people for LGBTQ rights. And the Jewish community is not a monolith, and so there are some Jewish people that disagree with LGBTQ non-discrimination, but they are in the vast minority. There is a yearly study that comes out through PRRI, which is an American Values Survey, and it ranks religious affiliation and support for different causes. And Jewish support for LGBTQ non-discrimination is of the highest among organized religions at I think 81% or so. So there is no monolithic community, but the organized Jewish community is relatively aligned on this issue. And so what we have been working on more than education on the importance of this issue is like what to do now that we are aligned and how to construct a conveying a message that is going to support LGBTQ non-discrimination through a faith lens. We're finding so often that religion is used as an excuse for discrimination against LGBTQ people. And so to fully come out as people who are Jewish and are doing LGBTQ advocacy through a faith lens is able to directly counter that argument. And we also work very closely um, with secular organizations in the states that we have physical presence. So, like I said, I live in Florida, and we work very closely with Equality Florida and go to Tallahassee every year to do advocacy as Jewish people for LGBTQ rights. And we do that in Texas, we've done it in North Carolina. And so I think that that is kind of our role, is to bring the Jewish folks that want to take action to the experts who are doing the advocacy every single day, just like Reed is sharing in the work that Equality Virginia is doing. Um, Something that is really exciting and the opportunity here is that when Keshet does our education work, our advocacy work, for trans liberation and against transphobia, we are talking about the shared vision for the future that we are co-creating. And we try to go in that direction instead of sharing every instance of transphobia and all the worst things that exist out there. Even the Supreme Court decision today, barring trans athletes from sports in states that have bans. And so exactly what we're talking about now, like if there was a Supreme Court decision against same-sex marriage, like it would go down to the states. But if this is a winning issue, it's like such a beautiful opportunity to fight for something and to be a beacon of hope for a future that is possible. And that even at a time when so many people are suffering and feeling so beaten down, that the wins are still happening and queer people are thriving in states all across the country, and there's positive legislation that is happening too. And anytime that we're able to champion that, I think it is such a gift. And when you have a legislator that is supportive of LGBTQ identity or supportive of anything that you support, I think there's so much beauty in the opportunity to thank them and to share that you support their position, because I know the opposition is definitely calling them and telling them that they are wrong. And so I think that using our Judaism and using our Jewish values, like we can definitely reach out and sustain and work towards that shared vision of a future.
Thank you, John. You reminded me of a conversation that we had offline as we were preparing for today's conversation about the leaning into the joy. And in a lot of our advocacy work, it's sort of the scary stories, the reason that we need protections, but there's so much strength in leaning into the joy and those thank yous. And there's a program that started this year or last year within the Jewish community called One Mitzvah a Day. And it's a way of making a point of saying thank you once a day. It's an e-blast or a text message that goes out saying, and actually yesterday's was about Fairfax County's school board decision to include holidays in the school calendar. And it blasted out and got everybody who's in the network to say a thank you. So I appreciate what you just brought up. I want to dive a little bit deeper into the idea of like why now? What's the importance now? And I know, Adam, you talked about the long process and the need to get it through both chambers and whatnot. And I'm wondering how much the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade, sort of created an urgency. Was that urgency already there because of the long process that we know is in Virginia? How much does, and then looking at today's decision on transgender sports, how much is the urgency of now versus it's just a long process? You talk about that a little
Well,
bit.
it started as a long process, but
Hmm.
in the Supreme Court decision on Dobbs, I believe that it was Justice Thomas said, or that he wanted to see the marriage decision revisited, and to have justices openly calling for overturning past decisions of the court is not something you see every day, and there were others who share his ideological bent. So it'll be insurance so that if it ever is overturned, that it can't negatively impact us in Virginia. Um, but but it had already started. We'd been working on it for years when we saw what happened in the Dobbs decision.
And have you seen how that has changed the reception, whether among other lawmakers or out in the community?
Yeah, I think there was some more enthusiasm for the amendment happening now because of it. And also, we saw some Republican legislators realize that this is a real thing. And in the Senate, we did get some Republican votes for the amendment. So that was nice to see it be bipartisan, at least in the Senate.
Hmm. I'm wondering if you can each talk to sort of the journey working on this issue and how has it changed over time? It's great to hear you say that it has become bipartisan. To me, that's kind of a parallel to John commenting on the 80% of the Jewish community that was polled saying that they are supportive of the issue. I'm curious how you in your own work and lives have seen the issue evolve over time and how people have changed their minds or not. Adam, you're
Hey,
unmuted, so let's start
yeah,
with you.
yeah. Well, let me just jump in and say that
Yeah.
I've had the privilege when I was a legislator, we had changed the law that legislators could officiate at marriages in Virginia. And I had the privilege of officiating at three same-sex marriages. And and I'd also officiated at weddings of opposite sex couples. And to see the joy of the same-sex couples, there was a couple that had been together for more than 40, maybe even close to 50 years, who I officiated at, and to see that they finally had their relationship recognized was wonderful. And to think about going back on that or precluding that right from future couples is untenable to me. And I think the polling reflects it too. You know, in Virginia, when we lost the marriage amendment vote 20 years ago, it wasn't as overwhelming as some folks might have predicted. And I think there's not just an urgency among people in the LGBT community, but an urgency among people at large to lock in our progress and not to have anything that can set it back. And people have recognized in recent times that there's a lot of things that we thought that were guaranteed in this country that are under attack, and uh, we don't want marriage to be one of those things that is in question. So yeah, there is an urgency, and it's been a privilege to work on it over a long period.
Reeve and John.
Yeah, I think I can provide kind of an interesting perspective in response to this question. I've been with Equality Virginia for a little over a year at this point. But I'm only 23 years old. I grew up a transgender kid in Virginia from the age of 12. And so for me, like I think the majority of my adult life has been representative of all the progress that we've made so far as a country, because I think, it wasn't that long ago that there were anti-sodomy laws on the books and Lawrence v. Texas overturning those. And like, I just think the rate of progress that we've made on LGBTQ plus issues more broadly has been truly remarkable. And I think that's, in a lot of ways a reflection of like the bravery of people who are open to be visible, who are willing to share their stories, because like I think it's astounding that like, I've been talking to a lot of, older LGBTQ plus couples. Like I met some folks from Arlington who talked to me about how like his husband had, some chronic health issues and they had to call an ambulance to their house at one night. And they were sharing just how afraid they were in that moment because their first thought wasn't like, oh, thank goodness, help is on the way. They were like, will the paramedics still help us when they realize that we're gay and like sleeping, like sharing a bedroom, And like that was just almost unimaginable to me at that point. And I think we have progressed so far in such a short amount of time. And yet we are seeing like there's an inherent backlash, I think, that comes with that, rapid increase in visibility, that is a real threat. And I think that makes this moment so much more urgent because this isn't, a victory lap, I think. Like the marriage equality amendment is kind of like it has to be our line in the sand. It has to be our opportunity to organize across Virginia and show up for LGBTQ rights in a moment where they are being systematically dismantled through these like overarching, very well-funded campaigns that are trying to push back on those gains and progress that we've made. And I also think like another couple I met, this one based out of Richmond, they had to travel out of state in order to give birth to their first son. So they used IVF. And so both mothers were like biological mothers of the child, and yet they had to move to Washington, D.C. to give birth in order to have both their names on the birth certificate. They pursued a very expensive legal process to second parent adopt that same child to ensure that that their parental rights would never be in question because this was before Obergefell, before marriage equality was the law of the land in Virginia. And yet, like, that is so astounding to me. And yet that was only in 2013, And so this is a real opportunity to shore up those rights and ensure like Virginia is for all lovers. We have to stick to our values and ensure that our Constitution is reflecting the lives of the thousands of couples that are already living here, who already call Virginia home and who have built their lives together and rely on the institution of marriage and the rights and privileges that that brings with it in order to live their lives to the fullest and, ensure their families are protected fully.
Thank you. I very much appreciate hearing those stories. And you're right. So when we think about all the rights that in this field and in others that are just less than a generation away from not having had them, it's really astonishing to think of what we take for granted. John, did you want to jump in?
Sure, I'll share. First of all, I'll read like so much is resonating with like the progress that's been made. Um, I think it was in 2008 when Florida had the same-sex marriage ban as part of the bills that could be voted on, and I was in eighth grade, ninth grade. I was in like student government at the time, and we were there at the polling station, supporting a like penny added to public school funding. And the group immediately next to us was the anti same-sex marriage group. And I came out very young and was there, and like these, and me and my friends were 15 years old, 14 years old, and these adults came over to us and they just started to tell us how like the risk to society that same-sex marriage was going to be. And it was so scary to be like a 14, 15-year-old and have these adults come over to me and having this conversation. And then and like I remember being in high school and growing up and being like, oh, like maybe one day I'll be able to get married, like maybe my 40s or my 50s, it'll be legal if in my lifetime. And now it is. And so it's just like I remember thinking it was decades away, and then it happened so much sooner than I thought it was going to happen. Um, and I think that that does come with pushback and with like repercussions, and that's really unfortunate. But I think that that has caused this to kind of get as extreme and as public and as open as it has gotten is because of that pushback. Where, um, a few years ago there was the Respect for Marriage Act, and that was a piece of legislation that is national to protect same-sex and interracial marriage. And we were able to bring together 107 Jewish organizations to publicly stand in support together in favor of the Respect for Marriage Act. And so across denominations. And so the Jewish perspective has been, for the last several years at least, to be in support of these causes and to take action in favor of them. And so I feel like this moment being now is kind of this like feedback loop where it's like we got to win, and then there's huge pushback that turns it into a big news cycle thing, and then it just kind of like self-perpetuates. But um, just like trans people never asked to be part of the public debate that is going on right now, same-sex couples that want to get married were never asking to be part of a public debate or conversation. And so, like, why now? I think now is the second best time possible. There's like a piece of Jewish wisdom that says the best time to plant a tree was 70 years ago, but the second best time to plant a tree is today. And so I feel very aligned with the idea that, I wish that these pieces of legislation were never introduced and never passed in the first place, but like now is as good a time as any to right those wrongs.
Love that. So looking specifically at the referendum, let me, if you could weigh in on what we can do to raise awareness. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what I've been hearing is the issue here is not the public support for it. It's more just getting people out to vote. So I know, Reed, you mentioned something called Empower. I'm kind of curious to hear what that is and whether that relates to this question. I think it did. Talk to us a little bit about what we can do to make sure that this gets across the finish line.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest thing here is going to be like talking to your friends, talking to your family, like word of mouth, I think is going to be so powerful. Like, we have a very crowded ballot this time around. It's midterms elections, like one of the scariest election cycles, I think, like in our history. But we also have, three amendments on the ballot total, reproductive freedom, voting rights restoration, and marriage equality in Virginia. And so, like, I think a lot of people, don't really remember the fact that there's an amendment, that was added to our Constitution back in 2006 that was, implementing a ban on same-sex marriage. They would think like, oh, this is already settled law. This is like, we have federal protections. We don't really need to worry about this. And so I think like talking to people as much as possible and, ensuring that as many people as possible are aware, like, what is on the ballot, how are we going to fix it? How can we get involved to help people? I think, the Empower app is a big part of that. It's an opportunity to make it as easy as possible to, text people, to stay in contact with people through like a relational organizing network of like, friends of friends of friends. I think, one of the most powerful things about the LGBTQ community and our allies is that, everybody knows each other, right? Or at least it feels that way to me personally living in it. And I think that's a real strength here is that we can like spread the news, spread the gossip, get everybody in on this because this is a serious question that's going to be on our ballot. And I think it's a real opportunity for Virginia to take a strong stand, in favor of protecting the rights that we've worked so hard to win in the face of, kind of an overwhelming backlash to the progress that we've made thus far. And so I think, not only is like talking to folks important, but also just like getting involved through organizing opportunities, through like, local committees that are campaigning or different organizations across the state of Virginia that are going to be collaborating with us in the future. Like it's not just going to be us. I think it's going to be, a network of people all kind of working together to ensure that as many voters as possible are aware of the stakes this election and are able to ensure that Virginia kind of stays ahead of the curve because we are really like a stronghold in the South for protecting LGBTQ plus rights, to protecting, access to gender affirming care, to protecting access to reproductive care. Like we serve an important role, I think, and this is a real opportunity to draw that line in the sand, as I said, and say, like, as Virginians, like, this is who we are. This is who we are now. And 20 years later, I think, it's not unreasonable to think like it is well past time to remove this stain in our Constitution. And so there are going to be a lot of opportunities to get involved in that directly, but I think overwhelmingly just talking to people is going to be kind of the common thing between each opportunity.
It's great. So I'm putting in the chat, and John, I see you unmuted, so I'll let you jump in. But I just wanted to let everyone listening know I'm putting in the chat the link to Virginia elections website where you can check to see if you are registered to vote, confirm that your registration is still good, and find out information about where to vote in November. I'll probably put it in the chat again before we go, but I just want to make that plug. Our democracy relies on everybody participating, and this in particular. So go ahead, John. Actually, John, before I let you go, I'm also going to say invite everybody who's watching to go ahead and put questions that you might have in the Q&A. We'll continue this conversation, but as I see questions, I will turn to them. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, definitely plus one to everything Reed said. And I think that also, like, this is an opportunity to going back to the joy of it all, like to vote for something instead of voting against something. And I think that just like sharing that excitement and sharing that opportunity and really framing it as a celebration of democracy at a time when that is feeling few and far between, I think that that alone is an incentive that folks could want to like get them to go and vote. And I think that also a piece of this is like we're just taking steps to the depoliticalization of people's identities. Like removing this from the Constitution will take it out. Like it's not like this is going to be baked in as a protection, like they're removing a piece. And so it's the absence of the debate, I think, is a good thing. And so when people are not being asked to be politicized and don't want their identities to be politicized, taking them out of the political discourse is part of that journey. And so I think that this is an example, like a way, this is an opportunity to be an example of what that looks like and how equality, like sometimes no news really is good news. And so I think that this is an opportunity where like we can put the news to bed.
Mm-hmm. Reed, you mentioned the other referenda that are on the ballot. I'm wondering if that timing, how do you see these three working together, working against each other? Is it a plus that sort of people are going to be motivated to vote on all three? If you could all speak about that.
Yeah, well, I know Equality Virginia is in favor of all three amendments, and I think each of them is important in their own right. In this current moment that we're in, I think overwhelmingly, like as much as many opportunities as there are to bring people in, to make people aware across those lines and intersectionally, because I think a lot of people are impacted directly by all three, and
Mhm.
it's a real opportunity to collaborate across Virginia. And I think we've been seeing that already. And like there are certain organizations or entities that are really like kind of uniquely positioned to speak to all three amendments in particular. And I really think that this election is going to be one of the most important in Virginia's history through the midterms, through the amendments on the ballot, just taking a really strong stand for human rights, for, freedom from government interference, for just having the ability to live your life the way that you want to. I think that is applicable to the Reproductive Freedom Amendment, to the Voting Rights Restoration Amendment, and ensuring that, everybody has access to use their voice in voting, and the Marriage Equality Amendment. I think they do all really work hand in hand, and I think it's an opportunity to kind of collaborate across different groups who I think we can all benefit from learning from one another and like meeting this moment and the challenges that are on the horizon with the energy and power that I think it really calls for.
Hmm. Hmm. Adam, can you add?
Yeah, I think Reed put it really well, but I also wanted to point out that this is a campaign and that the only way we can lose this is if the other side is effective in putting out misinformation that is believed by the public. It's a pretty straightforward, an important amendment and self-explanatory, but it's important to know what it doesn't do. This amendment doesn't force any religious person to preside over any marriage just the way it is today. For example, if you're Jewish and you don't have a get, some rabbis won't if you were divorced previously, some rabbis wouldn't marry you, or if you're Catholic and you're divorced, a priest might not marry you in that religion. But there was a lot of misinformation that was put forward at committee hearings about this forcing people to do things. It doesn't force anything. It just preserves the freedom that we have today. And it's important that people stay informed, and they might do that by signing up to subscribe to Equality Virginia's emails so that when the campaign is ongoing, they can be armed with the information to write a letter to the editor at the appropriate moment, or tell people in their friend circles closer to voting time what the amendment does, and what it doesn't do if that becomes necessary. Yes.
That's great. That's so helpful. Thank you. And Reed, maybe you can put in the chat where people can go to sign up for the communications from Equality Virginia to get that information. Thank you. Yes, that's really helpful. So that makes me wonder, Adam, what is the opposition? How organized is the opposition in Virginia? And I'll add on to that, here in Northern Virginia, and the DC region in general, we're kind of in a blue bubble to some extent. And so, I feel like here it really is a matter of largely turnout. That feels more urgent, like getting the numbers rather than actually convincing people that this should happen. But I imagine that's not the case in other parts of Virginia. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, I think there are fair-minded people all over Virginia, and it'll be exciting to see some places that are not necessarily in the blue bubble supporting basic equality and law of the land. However, the opposition, at this point, I haven't seen signs of an organized opposition outside of some people in more extreme branches of religious communities. I have not seen any kind of political opposition. I think one indicator might be that when this came up for debate in both the House and the Senate, while we saw some opposition testimony from the audience, from people who were, I thought, kind of embarrassing themselves, we did not see legislators who voted against this speak against it. I think some of them voted that way because of their primaries, perhaps, if they're afraid of a strong family foundation influence in their primary, but none of them wanted to speak against it on the floor and be associated with it, which I thought was a good sign.
That's encouraging. That's good to hear.
Yeah, I don't know if did that fully cover your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think so. But yeah, but Reed and John, John, I'd be curious to hear about it sort of nationally. And then Reed, if you have anything to add to what's going on in Virginia.
Yeah, I would say nationally, what we're seeing the most of right now is a few different things. One thing that we're seeing a lot nationally right now is just like how to respond to the anti-trans legislation that is happening broadly. I think that with the Respect for Marriage Act, that in many states that are fully progressive, what we're finding is that actually there is still anti-LGBTQ legislation being introduced. In I believe in the last 2 years, the only state that has not introduced anti-LGBTQ legislation is Vermont. And so what I'm learning so much lately is that it's not even so much about like safe and unsafe states, that it is really these negative pieces of legislation are popping up everywhere. And like always reminding myself to also bring in the positive, like there's at the same time that there is more anti-LGBTQ legislation being proposed than ever before, there is more pro-LGBTQ legislation being proposed than ever before at the same time, like as a counter. And so I think that what we're seeing is, and what we're trying to convey nationally, is the local power that exists. Using Florida, where I live as an example, when the state government made it illegal to have the rainbow crosswalks, many city-based governments did something else instead, and they were able to like exercise their power in that way. And I think that oftentimes folks think of a state a little more like as one broad experience than it actually is. And so like the national lens, I would say, is has taught us how everything starts at the local. And it really is like those cultural shift conversations. And getting somebody to when we talked about marriage, I remember Love is Love being a campaign and it really being about like the humanization of the idea of just like normalizing. And I see that as our continued work. And I see the opposition like directly trying to combat that and try to paint queer people, LGBTQ people generally as inherently political or sexualized or problematic or a danger. And for the vast, vast majority, they are just people who are trying to live their lives in the best way possible. And I think that is a universal human experience. And that the folks is like assumption that they don't know a trans person, I think is being exploited and at the national level. And I think that it's the same thing with gay people and same-sex marriage. Like the idea that this is an issue that you will never have to touch is incorrect. Anyone can be trans, anyone can be LGBTQ, and so like I think of those campaigns that were like, if you don't like gay marriage, don't get gay married. And I think that that is a direction that I hope that we are able to go towards. And the national movement is actively trying to maybe like depoliticize the ideas of our identities. And I think that that is happening simultaneously to this really important state-based and local-based work that will protect people while federal and state governments are not doing that part of their jobs.
Mhm. I am curious before moving on to Reed, what were some of the alternatives to the crosswalks?
Well, so I've seen bike racks where like
Okay.
every piece of the bike rack was a different color. I've seen benches. I have seen the crosswalks like in the street were taken out. So then like
Mhm.
the curb of the sidewalk has been made into a rainbow. And that's like a silly example of like people doing what they need to do, but like a more maybe substantial one is that folks may be familiar with is when Florida had a trans bathroom ban um in public and government owned buildings. Like many of the almost every airport immediately converted to having gender neutral bathrooms.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
buildings did that all across the state. And
Mhm.
so like I think that the arc of justice is that gay marriage is going to be not even a debate or a question, and LGBTQ identity will no longer be a debate and a question. And it's more of like how long is it going to take us to get there,
Yeah.
and how many conversations are going to have to be had, and how many people are going to have to suffer on the journey to the future that I think is an eventual inevitability.
Mhm. Reed, I feel like I cut you off from answering the previous question.
No, you're so fine. And I think I mostly just want to echo what John and Adam have been saying in the sense that, if all goes to plan here, like our main objective is to ensure that life for the thousands of same-sex married couples who call Virginia home remains unchanged, right? And I think the most important thing that we can be doing right now, kind of like Adam said, is ensuring that people are aware of what exactly this amendment does, right? It repeals an outdated ban on same-sex marriage from our Constitution and replaces it with an affirmative right to marry whomever you love, regardless of race, gender, or sex. And I do think that we're going to see opposition try and spin this in a way that, tries to like confuse people about what the scope of this is, despite the language itself being very clear that it is, focused on marriage equality, like this is a marriage equality amendment. And I think, if like the 2025 election is anything to go off of, like I do think there's going to be a lot of like anti-trans focused advertisements and attempts to like play with people's emotions and make them feel angry or confused about something that, they can clearly see is already a part of their day-to-day lives. Because we are at a moment in which like we are fighting from the high ground. Marriage equality has been the law of the land for I think 12 years now. We just had the anniversary. Um, or sorry, 11 years. And it's like we have the opportunity to ensure that people recognize that nothing is changing here. And while like that anti-trans focus has been pretty central in their attempts to try and like distract people and try and make them feel angry or scared. It's one of those things where we've also seen it didn't really work. It's people don't really see the relevance here. And I think that that is going to hold strong going forward as well, because at a certain point you can only like point and say, look over there so many times before people start to realize, like, hey, actually, I don't think that that's really super relevant to this conversation in particular.
Thank you. Well, I'm looking at the time, and as we're coming up on the hour, I want to give each of you a chance, maybe just to say some parting words. I want to thank you for being here. This has been a really great conversation. I'm honored to be a part of it, and I've learned a lot just from talking with you. So I hope that I'm going to put in the chat one last time the link to the Board of Elections so that people can go vote. Encourage everybody to talk to their neighbors, to their friends, to their family, encourage them to vote, encourage them to vote yes on the marriage equality amendment, as well as the other amendments that will be on the ballot in November. And I guess I'm going to start backwards this time from how I started. So John, if you want to share some closing remarks with us.
Just so much gratitude. Thank you all for having me, and Reed and Adam, like, so grateful for the advocacy that you're doing, and the work that you've been doing in Virginia and the ripple effects that it has. And just thank you for including me in the conversation. It was so great.
Reed.
I mean, I really think it is so easy to feel discouraged right now to look at what's happening, in the federal landscape and give into that feeling of doom and helplessness. And yet we have a real opportunity. Virginia is one of the only, I think, the only state in the country right now with a proactive LGBTQ ballot measure. And we have a real opportunity to ensure that every family in Virginia is protected equally under the law, no matter what happens. And I think that's an opportunity that we're going to see Virginia voters really respond to well in the future. And, we would appreciate any help that anybody is willing to give to help us get across that finish line in November. And not just, with like a small margin of victory. I think we need to blow them out of the water. And I think this is really an opportunity for us to say that this is happening, this is who we are, and this is what Virginia stands for. Thank you for having me.
Amazing. Thank you. Adam.
Vicky, I enjoyed the conversation and the fellow panelists, and I want to talk about something that gives me inspiration in these fights, to think that there are better days ahead for our country. Thomas Jefferson said something in, I think it was 1818, and it's engraved on the side of his memorial in Washington, D.C. Jefferson said, I'm quoting, "I'm not an advocate for frequent changes in laws and constitutions, but laws and institutions must go hand in hand with the progress of the human mind. As that becomes more developed, more enlightened, as new discoveries are made, new truths discovered, and manners and opinions change, with the change of circumstances, institutions must also keep pace with the times." And I think that makes me think that this is not just a 2026 issue, but this is an evolution issue that's in keeping with the best traditions of our country. When we started this country, it was great if you were a landowning white man, but it didn't include women voting. It didn't include people of color. Didn't include equal treatment for Native Americans, and so many things have expanded, gotten better. And this is our chance in 2026, right here, right now, to make things better and to fulfill the promise of America in our 200th anniversary, 250th anniversary.
It's an amazing way to end this. Thank you so much. Thank you for all of the work that you have done bringing us to this day. And thank you all for joining us for this conversation. Be well and go vote in November.